Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. My name is China and today I'm going to be recommending you some books. So I found this tag while I was perusing on YouTube trying to figure out what to post for my next video, and it's basically just like a general book recommendation tag. I'll link the creator who I first found. I don't know if she's like the actual creator of this particular tag or if she got it like inspired by someone else, but I will link the video that I watched for it down below for you all to watch as well. So it is literally just called the book recommendation tag. There's like 15 prompts and I will choose a book per prompt. I feel like this will give a good sense of like what types of books I like to read, and it will just keep you in the know of like what type of books you might see on my channel. So I thought this would be a good tag to kind of start off with. I don't know how popular tags are now. I know when I was getting into YouTube, they were huge back then, like recommendation tags as well as like book challenge tags and all that stuff. So I wanted to do this one. So let's just get into it. Okay, so the first prompt is a book you tell people is your favorite. Now, I read this in an interesting way because I don't think this is necessarily like your actual favorite book. It's kind of like the book you would tell people in public that's your favorite book, something that you really want to recommend to people, but it's not like necessarily your favorite book. That's kind of how I viewed it. It's like something that you would tell people in public that is your favorite book. Because I have a lot of favorite books that like are kind of embarrassing that I don't really want to tell people in public, but I also have favorite books that I do want people to know about. And so this was kind of hard to choose for, but I ended up choosing The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is a trilogy, and each book in this series won the Hugo Award, which is like a big deal. And it, deserves N.K. Jemisin right because this is an amazing series. It's set in this world that's like an apocalyptic world where there's a bunch of these like weird happenings going on that are very like environmental. And it's almost as like if it's an apocalyptic world, because we've kind of like used up all of our resources and continue to destroy our world. This is kind of how like Earth is getting back at us essentially. So like there's these different seasons that happen and they're really destructive and can wipe out like nations and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the premises, and we follow a couple of different characters throughout this. And I always recommend this book because I feel like it's really relevant to what's going on today. Even though it is more like magic and science-based, a lot of what's happening in our current world is because of how we've abused our Earth, and it's kind of kicking us back in the face. And I feel like you can really connect that with this book here. So I feel like it's reflective of like what's going on in the world today. And I really like the characters in this book as well, and just everything, like the journeys we go on with these characters. And I like the magic system in here, and it's just such a really well-developed world, and that is why I would recommend it to people and tell people that it's my favorite, because it is one of my favorite series. And it also, I feel like I feel really smart when I recommend this book because it is a Hugo Award winner. N.K. Jemisin is a well-known author. She has a bunch of different series that I want to get into, but yeah, this is something I would tell people that is my favorite. Okay, and the second question is a book that is your guilty pleasure. So I actually don't have the first book of the series. I listened to the first book on audiobook, and I haven't purchased like the whole series. I only have the second and third book as a physical copy. I don't know where my second book is, but it is A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. So this was one of the earlier books I read, like when getting back into reading. It was like everywhere on BookTube when I got back into reading, which is like 2016. It was like shortly after I graduated from college. So everyone kept talking about A Court of Thorns and Roses. So I picked up the audiobook to listen to while I was going on a trip to New York. And I finished it like that whole weekend. I was like super enthralled by the story. I was like so invested in it. And I was like, yes, this is exactly what I needed to get me out of the slump. And it's like spicy, and I really don't like Tamlin, but that is who our main, focus is on in the first book. But I just loved the world too, and like fairies, and I love that fairies were like becoming a huge thing. So this is definitely a guilty pleasure because it's like very romance heavy. It is a fantasy world, and the fantasy world is cool, but it definitely focuses heavily on the romance. And it's just like a fun, fluffy fantasy read that I just really, really love. And I love that it is like resurfacing on Book Talk and everything, because I feel like it was so popular when I got into it. And now it's kind of like resurfacing. People are getting more into Sarah J. Maas works. I don't love the newer books in this series just because it focuses on a particular character that I didn't really like. But yeah, if you don't know what this book is, then you're kind of living under a rock because it's hugely popular. But it follows Feyre, and she gets thrown into this kingdom of fairies, and it's kind of like just everything about that. She falls in love with Tamlin, who's kind of like this ruthless character, and I really did not like him. And I was like, I feel like people liked him of the first book, and I was like, why do people like him? Like, I just never liked him. And then, we get another romance that happens, which I prefer over Tamlin's romance. But yeah, there's like a lot going on in this book, and it's such a guilty pleasure for me. So, Court, Thorns, and Roses. Okay, the next question is a book everyone loved, but you didn't. So this is really hard because I feel like I try to choose books that I know I will like, but there have been a couple of books that I picked up that I just didn't like at all. And one of those was Where the Crawdads Sing. This was one of Reese's book club picks, and when I picked it up, it was like everywhere because I think it was announced like at the time that it was being adapted into a movie. So like everyone was reading it, and I just kept seeing it all over BookTube. And I was like, why is this book like everywhere? Like usually Reese's book club picks are like they're really popular, and most of them have become adapted through Reese's production company, Hella Sunshine. And I was interested in this book of like what it was about, but it's not the typical book that I read. Like I don't read a lot of like just basic fiction books, but I was intrigued by the storyline and like the world that our main character was living in, because it was like set in, I think, North Carolina, and it was like in this marsh town, and she's kind of this like oddball character, and like something happens to her, and she's kind of like thrown into this case that she was like wrongfully accused of. And then there was also stuff going at the time about the author and her family, because they were being accused of like animal cruelty and like a whole bunch of other stuff happening, and I think like murder in like Africa or something. There's like a whole lot of stuff going on with this author. So I was like, okay, I'll pick it up to see what all the hubbub is about. And I was liking it for like the most part. I really was interested in like the character and what she was going through with like her relationships and all of that, and just kind of being a loner, but like people were really intrigued by her. So I was really interested in that, but I feel like the ending really fell flat to me, and I actually hated the ending. So like I honestly was probably going to give this a really high rating because I really loved it just like up until the last chapters, and it really just like put me off this book. Like I really did not like how it ended. So this is the book that everyone loved but I didn't. And again, I feel like it got like really good reviews. Obviously, it was widely popular to make a movie about it. And I watched the movie and it was pretty good. It wasn't like amazing or anything. I don't think it's one of my favorite adaptations that Reese Witherspoon has done. But it was like, I think it was better than the book, which usually doesn't happen. The next question is a book you read the fastest. So this was again hard because I'm not really a fast reader, like at all. So I was trying to think of like books that I would read in like a couple of days, and typically they're like shorter books. And again, I do not have the first book of this. I have the second and third of the series because I again listened to the audiobook for the first one. But that is Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. It is a Japanese book, and it's set in Tokyo at this cafe where people can kind of like make choices before they die. They go to this cafe and they kind of have conversations, and the cafe is a place you kind of go to before you pass away. And I read this really fast. They're really short books, but they're really harrowing and like really beautiful and just highly emotional. Like I really felt pulled to the first book, so I really wanted to continue the rest of the series. And they're just really like short snippets of like different characters we follow and like choices they make, and it really puts you in a perspective of like how you view your life and how you live your life, and it's just really, really good. And they're really short. Like I probably listened to the audiobook within the span of like a couple of days, and like you can just really fly by these books. I'm sorry if my synopsises aren't great. I feel like these are relatively well-known books, so it's kind of hard to like give a good synopsis, and I don't want this to be like extremely long. But yeah, anyways, Before the Coffee Gets Cold, book that I read the fastest. The next question is a book that deserves more hype. So for this one, I am picking a book that I feel like I haven't heard a lot about. I've kind of seen it a couple of times here and there on Book Talk and BookTube, but not really a whole lot. I mainly heard about it because it was becoming a TV show before I read it. Like the TV show was like coming out soon. And that is Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. I loved this book, and again, I feel like it's one that I don't hear a lot about. I actually read this pretty fast too because I was just so enthralled by the characters, by the world. And it's not like a fantasy series, it's a fiction book. It is about two children who lose their mom. She had cancer, I believe, and we kind of get to know their stories about their past and how they came to California, because they were originally from Jamaica, I believe. No, Caribbean. Black cake is like a specific cake that is made in the region that they grew up in. And it's like a traditional like family recipe. And so we kind of get their family history, all of that. So it spans like a long period of time. Like we get a lot on the mom as she was like growing up at the Caribbean, and we also get a lot about like the two children's childhood and upbringing, and also adult life and how they're living now in the US. And there's like a lot about racism, and they were born in California, I believe. If I'm remembering correctly, their mother moved from the Caribbean from she moved to London, actually. And we get a lot about like her upbringing in London, which is like really interesting. But yeah, I just really love the emotions in this and the character development. We get perspectives of like each sibling and then also the mother. So like each chapter follows a different character. That was one thing that I didn't really love about this book, because I really wanted to focus on certain characters, but we kept flipping back and forth. Like, I loved the mother's story, and I really wanted to know more about her story and her relationship with her father, because it was really heartbreaking. And just her living in the Caribbean as a woman is not easy. So I really loved getting to know that aspect of it. It was a really well done show as well. I really liked the show, but it did not get picked up for a second season, which was really heartbreaking. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book, and it definitely deserves more hype. The next question is a book that is becoming a movie or TV show. So I was like looking at my bookshelves and kind of like perusing online to see if any of the books that I owned were becoming TV shows. And there's some that were like potentially becoming TV shows, but I don't think the rights ever got picked up and they kind of just fell off the face of the earth. So I don't know what happened with a lot of those. Like a lot of times in adaptations is like the rights will get picked up, but then like nothing will ever come to fruition with them. So I'm choosing a book that has already become a TV show. And that is My Plain Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brodi Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. And I chose this because I recently watched the TV show and I actually really liked it. It was really funny. I loved the character dynamics, and it was an interesting world because it's like set in the UK, like way back in the, like, is it the 1800s or I don't know. But it's like about Queen Jane. And this is actually part of a series that follows different historical Janes throughout the past. And this one was like really funny. These are just really funny books. I feel like I don't really see a lot of these books online, but they're like really funny. And I just love the twist of like the supernatural elements. There is this species kind of that shapeshift into different animals, and the main plot line is that one of the characters wants to find a cure to just be human and to not be this species, because the species, they're well known in this world, but they're not really looked at in a nice, like, in a good way. So he wants to find a cure, and Jane, who becomes the king's wife, tries to help find the cure because she's like very sciencey, and she knows a lot about like herbs and all, like she's very smart and well equipped to potentially find a cure. But yeah, it's just a really funny, like, guilty pleasure kind of book, and the TV series was really well done. It was on Prime. I don't know if any of the other series or the other books in the series are becoming TV shows, but that would be really fun to see if they do. I believe there's My Calamity Jane, which is like a Western, and then I think there's another one that follows like historical Marys. I can't think of the other Jane. But yeah, really loved My Plain Jane. And I'm pretty sure this is... Oh, wait. No, this is a completely different one. So ignore everything I just said. Wait, hold on. Okay, so ignore everything I just said. Okay, so I'm so stupid. So this is actually... The whole synopsis I just gave was actually for My Lady Jane. I actually read that on ebook, which is why I don't have the physical copy. So this is My Plain Jane. It's a completely different book. So I'll put a placeholder for My Lady Jane. All the synopsis that I just did was for My Lady Jane, not My Plain Jane. This is a completely different book. So I was like, this doesn't sound right. This one is about like Wuthering Heights and all that stuff, all those shenanigans. So My Lady Jane is the one that I just talked about. So sorry, but let's move on. A book that you have reread the most is the next question. And I kind of reread, I don't reread. Like It's really, I have to be in a mood to reread. There's just so many books on my TBR that I need to get through, so like I don't have the time to reread. But the one that I feel like I've reread the most is probably The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. This is another one of my favorite all-time books, like ever. I really love this book. It is a very well-known classic. There is again a film adaptation, which I also love. And I mainly love this because of the character dynamics. It's a very short book as well. And this was one of the only books that we read in school that I actually like really ended up loving. And I just like really became a huge fan of the film and everything. So we follow Ponyboy, who is a greaser, and there's two different sides of this world we're in. There's greasers and there's socias. Greasers are the poor, on the poor side of town, wrong side of the tracks sort of thing. They're kind of viewed as like hooligans almost. And then we have the socias, who are the more socially elite, the more rich, the people, they are in sports. They're just very well off, and they're not very nice. So there's always a battle between the greasers and the socias, and we mainly follow the greasers because Ponyboy is a greaser, and he lives with his brothers, and I can't remember their parents died, I believe, in a car accident. His older brother has to kind of take care of his two younger brothers, kind of take the reins, and a huge fight happens between a couple of greasers and socias, and Ponyboy's best friend actually kills a soc because one of them was brutally attacking Ponyboy, and Ponyboy could have died had his friend not killed him. So they run away and are on the run because now the cops are after them, and they have to go to trial and all that stuff. And we kind of learn about like what it's like to be a greaser, and it's not really a fun world to be in. But I just really loved this story. I loved how much like character dynamics we got. There's a lot of characters in this, and it's a very short book, but I really loved the writing of it as well. And it's just a really good book, and I love it. I don't know why. Like, it's just one of those books that really has stood out to me and is one of my all-time favorite books. And I have reread it multiple times because, again, it's very short, and I just love it. And I've watched the movie many times. So, yes, that is The Outsiders. The next book to recommend is a book from a genre you don't typically read. So this one was actually kind of easy for me to pick because I end up loving this book. I think I heard about it from Peruse Project and Reagan. She's a very popular booktuber. And that is The Devil in the White City. And this is a nonfiction book. I do not read a lot of nonfiction, so I picked it up because I heard it doesn't really read like a nonfiction. It reads like a fiction book, and it follows a very well-known serial killer and during the World's Fair in Chicago of 1893. We kind of learn about the serial killer and what was going on with the World's Fair because it's like a huge display. And it was a really fast-paced and intriguing read for it being fiction. I've actually recommended this book to quite a few people. I even recommended it to some people like when I worked at Barnes & Noble for a little bit. And I don't know, I just was really blown away by the story. Again, I don't read a lot of like true crime. I don't read a lot of nonfiction. But it was really compelling, and it read like a mystery novel, which I really liked that aspect of. And it was really interesting to learn about the World's Fair, which is something I don't know a lot about. And the serial killer was also a well-known architect because he kind of used the fair to lure his victims. So, yeah, it was very interesting, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in nonfiction but like doesn't know what to pick up, because it is a fast read, and again, it doesn't read like a nonfiction. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of interesting historical stuff about it. So, but the next question is a book that deserves all the hype it gets. And for that one, I am picking a very well-known and much-loved book that also was adapted into a TV show, which was an amazing TV show. And that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have read a lot of Taylor Jenkins Reid stuff. I love her writing. I think she does her world really well. She writes a lot of books about like pseudo-famous people. Like she kind of is inspired by like famous people in real life, but kind of makes, they're not real. Like Daisy Jones and the Six follows a band, and Daisy Jones, who becomes a famous singer and joins this band, but they're not a real band. Like they're not in real life, but they're kind of like inspired by people in real life at this time. So I really love that aspect of it. And what I loved about this one is that it is told in interview format, so it's a really quick read. The audiobook is also really great, and again, this is a Reese's Book Club picked, and the show was picked up by her production company, but the audiobook was really fun to read, and there's like snippets of the songs that they write and everything, and it's just a fun read. It was really well done too. I loved the characters. Like, these are some of my favorite characters in books of all time, and the show was like amazing. I really wish the show got a lot more hype than it did. The actress who played Daisy Jones got nominated for like an Emmy or something. I think she did, but I feel like it should have gotten more hype because it was a really good show, and like I just loved the character dynamics and the emotions, and it was so good. So I would highly recommend this, and it deserves all the hype. It is such a good book, and all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's books are amazing. So yes, highly recommend. The next book, we have about 5 questions left, so bear with me. But question 10 is a book you usually recommend when asked to give a recommendation. So I'm picking a book that I have recommended a lot recently, especially if people are looking for a series to read. And that is, my stack is getting lower, so I have to bend down a little lower. But that book is Jade City. This is a trilogy, and again, winner of a lot of awards. This won World Fantasy Award of 2018, and again, much deserved. This was a series that I like really wanted to complete like right away. Sometimes it takes me a while to finish series, but this one I just was like, I need it. I need the next book now. Like, I need to finish the series now. And it's kind of like an urban fantasy set in the future a little bit. I guess it kind of is the future, but it follows a set of characters, and there's this like magical element called Jade, which enhances these characters' abilities, and they kind of make them like mega armies almost. The people who take these are trying to defend this island from foreign invasion, and there's just a lot of going on between different siblings. There's like heavy family dynamics, and also like this looming war going on, and like the growing addiction of Jade, because Jade is actually kind of viewed as like a drug. I would equate it to like a magical steroid almost. So it's highly addictive, and it just like makes you into this superhuman. But yeah, this is like an incredible series, and I always recommend it to people who are kind of like wanting to read a fantasy series but isn't as daunting. It's a big book, don't get me wrong. It's a large series, but it reads really fast, and it's not really a high fantasy because it is kind of like a modern day world, and there's not like creatures and stuff like that. It's like it's mainly about this magical jade stuff, but it's really good. I heard rumors that it might have been adapted or like was possibly going to become adapted, but again, those are just rumors. I would love if this got adapted. This would be an amazing TV show. And I feel like we haven't really gotten a lot of like really good fantasy shows recently. So, I would definitely love this if this became a show. I think the world is too vast for it to be a movie unless they're doing it like multiple movie series like Harry Potter or something like that. Okay, so that's Jade City. And the next question is a book that has your favorite characters or character. This one is really easy for me. So, and it is again very well loved. And that is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. Again, sorry, it's so reflective, but it is another book series that became a TV show and sadly got canceled so quickly. I don't know why, but we follow our amazing crows who are kind of like a band of bandits. They are kind of like a Robin Hood sort of situation. They are going on a heist together. It's a very well-known series, so I'm not going to get too into the weeds of the storyline, but the characters are amazing. They're some of my favorite characters of all time. I love all their dynamics. I just love their chemistry. I love everything about these characters with my whole heart. And I really wish the show continued on longer because it was amazing. But I feel like fantasy shows are really hard to continue for a long time because they are quite expensive to shoot. As someone who has done research on writing fantasy shows, because that is the main genre that I like to write for my shows, fantasy shows are very expensive, and if they don't get like the hype that they should, and it was on Netflix, so I feel like if they don't perform as well as Netflix would have liked to, they kind of just cut cords with it. Shadow and Bone also got picked up for a television series. It was really good, but also sadly got canceled. But I prefer the characters of Six of Crows far more than Shadow and Bone. There's a lot of Shadow and Bone that I did not like, but the show was great because of Ben Barnes. I did not like his character in Shadow and Bone, but these characters are they're like a warm cup of tea. I love them. I just love them so much. So, would highly recommend this for the characters. And the world is great too. It's like very dark and like gloomy and mysterious. Love it. Just love it. Put these on, I feel like I can put them on my desk now because the stack is getting smaller. There's a lot of questions on this tag, which I didn't realize when wanting to do this, but these tag videos take a while to film. But anyways, next question, recommendation is a book you wish you could live in. This is really hard for me because I feel like I don't read a lot of contemporary books. I don't read a lot of real life books, and the fantasy books that I read, I would not want to live in those worlds. So, because they're like very dark, heavy fantasies when in like war-torn nations. So I'm like, I don't want to live in those worlds. So there is a series I would love to live in, but I don't want to mention that on this channel. So the only book I can think of is Malibu Rising. Because, again, Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is set in the real world, but it is set in Malibu. I don't live too far from Malibu. It is set in a world of like famous rock stars. There's a couple of characters in Daisy Jones and the Six that pop up in here, and I can't remember if there's a couple of Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo that pop on here. But a lot of these worlds are like connected, which is really cool. Set in 1983, seems like a fun year. Even though this was set in a day and there was like a lot of there was a fire that happened. There's a lot of drugs and alcohol, but like to be thrown in this world of this party of like these lavish people, I would have loved to kind of like maybe be a reporter or something in this world, but I would not want to be in a part of the like drug and alcohol aspects of it. Just the like rich celebrity life is the life I would like to be, you know, a fly on the wall of. But this is the only thing I could think of from that question, because like a lot of the books I read are like death and destruction, so don't really want to be in those worlds. The next recommendation is a book you thought you would hate but ended up loving. And that was kind of hard because, again, I tried to read books that I feel like I know I would love versus spending the time. Like, if a synopsis doesn't do it for me, I just won't read it. There are books that I pick off solely based off the cover that sometimes fall flat for me. But I try to pick books that I think I would love. But this one in particular, I wasn't sure I would love because of the historical elements. But that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. And I chose this because it is a fantasy series, but it is heavily inspired by the Opium War. And that is just a particular time and place I don't know a whole lot about. So I wasn't sure how I was going to like it. At the time, I've heard really good things about this book. And everyone was like raving on about it. But again, it's a huge fantasy book. I love fantasy, but it takes me a while to get through these books. And this one was very much historical fantasy, which again, I don't love historical fantasies all too often. I try to read like high fantasies or urban fantasies. So this was like a complete departure for me, and I was getting into the more adult fantasy space, which again was a high departure from YA fantasies. But I ended up really loving this book. I love the character that we follow. I loved her story. I was really intrigued by the setting of the Opium War, and it is now something that I'm interested in like researching because again, I don't know a lot about it. But yeah, and I also love fantasy books that are set in like real places. Like there's magic and stuff, but these are all based off of places that exist in the world. So love that. And I have not finished the series yet. I should, because I really like it. I've read her other book, Babel. I didn't love that one as much, but it was still, you know, she's an amazing writer. I also read Yellowface by R.F. Kuang, which I really enjoyed as well. So I just need to finish the series. It's just, again, they're chunkers and they're very heavy. They're very dark. That was another reason I wasn't sure I was going to love it, because it touched upon a lot of heavy topics. So I need to be in like a good mood to read this. Or like not an anxious. I don't want to read this when I'm feeling anxious is what I'm trying to say. But yeah, loved this book. Wasn't sure how I was going to feel about it and need to continue on with the series. So we are on the last two questions, or I don't know why I keep saying questions. They're recommendations. The next recommendation is a book that made you cry. And again, this was kind of hard for me to pick a book for because I typically don't cry when reading. If there is a sad movie or a sad TV show, I might shed a little tear. I watch a lot of like non real things. So because I know they're not real, like they don't make me cry. If there's a show like involving real people and it's highly emotional, I might shed some tears. So it was really hard. There's only been a couple of books that have made me really cry. I'm not really someone who cries a lot at like reading. I don't know why, but it's just not something that I do. But one book that definitely made me cry was A Conjuring of Light. This is the third and final book of the Darker Shade of Magic series, which is one of my all-time favorite series. You will be hearing a lot about V. Schwab on my channel. She's one of my favorite authors. I actually got to meet her one time at a book signing. She came to San Francisco, and I can't remember what book it was for, but me and my friend went and we got a picture with her. It was great. I will put it up here, but she's one of my favorite authors of all time. And this was one of the earlier books that I started, or series that I started to read when getting back into reading. It was everywhere on BookTube. People were talking about it, so I was like, oh, I should read it. So I like flew through this series. I instantly fell in love with it, and I read this, and it was highly emotional. It's a large book, and I wasn't ready for this series to end because I absolutely loved everything about this series. And there are some things that happened to certain characters, and it made me weep and made me bawl. I was highly emotional reading this. Again, doesn't happen too often. The other couple of books that I could have talked about were like My Sister's Keeper, or that one's by Jodi Picoult, again turned into a movie. Oh, I cannot think of the title of this book. It's a John Green book, and it's very well known. Also became a movie. Why can't I think of the title? The Fault in Our Stars. I don't know why I couldn't think of that. That also made me cry. But I also read that when I was younger, when I feel like I cried a lot more when reading. But anyways, this made me cry because of things that happened to certain characters that I did not enjoy. So it just, it wrecked me. And I was reading a lot of these books when I was working for like my mom, and it was not a place to be reading these kind of books because I would be done with my shift and I'm like waiting for someone to pick me up because my mom still had to work. But I was waiting for people to pick me up to get on. It was during the summer. So I read it while I was waiting for someone, and I was like tearing up. So yeah, one of the few books that have made me cry. And we are finally on the last question. I feel like my first couple of videos are kind of going to be all over the place because I'm still not sure how to like approach these videos. So I hope you are bearing with me through this. There's also a ton of questions, recommendations on here, which I didn't realize, but we are finally on the last recommendation. And it is a book you wish you could read for the first time. Or I'm assuming like that's like a book you've read already that you wish you could read again for the first time. And we're continuing on with V. Schwab, and that would be A Darker Shade of Magic. This is a book, this was like one of the very first books I started reading after my huge reading slump. Again, I was a huge reader in high school and like middle school, loved reading. Kind of stopped reading during college because I just didn't have the time. And so after I graduated, I had all the time in the world and I was getting back into reading. And again, this series kept coming up everywhere. I kept hearing things about V. Schwab and everything about her. And I was like, oh, this book sounds interesting. It's got like a competition. I loved like Hunger Games growing up. And it's set in this like fantasy world with like this cool magic system. I was like, I'll give it a shot. And absolutely flew through it. I loved it. I really wish I could reread it for the first time again because it really got me back into that reading mindset and made me realize how much I loved reading. So I was like, this is a book that I wish I could reread again for the first time. I just absolutely love the series. This is, again, one of my favorite series of all time. I love the characters. I love the world. The second book isn't my favorite, but I loved the introductions of the characters in this book. And in the last book, again, ruined me. It's also a series I would love to reread, like the whole thing. Again, just don't have the time for that right now, especially because the third book is so long. But yeah, really wish I could reread this for the first time because it is quite an amazing series, and it also introduced me to one of my favorite authors of all time. And it also inspired me to write my own stories. So there is that. And that is the last recommendation. This ended up being longer than I thought it was going to be, but apparently I am just very talkative today. So I hope you like this. I don't know who to tag in this. If you watch this and want to do it yourself, go ahead and do it. I know in like tag videos, people would like tag other booktubers. I'm a very small channel, so I feel like no one will see this. But if you liked this and want to do it yourself, go right ahead. And again, I'm going to link the video that I watched to, that inspired me to do this video. And I will link her channel, that video, down below. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I know it's been a minute since my last video. Definitely check out my channel. I have a couple of videos on there. I want to do at least like 3 to 4 videos per month. So there might be some time in between like each post. And also I'm doing more shorts and stuff now, so you can definitely check out the shorts. I'm also on TikTok and everything, so you can check me out there. And I also have another channel where I do K-pop reaction videos, K-pop and some J-pop here and there. But yeah, all that stuff will be in the description below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to hit subscribe, definitely do. But again, only if you want to. I'm not going to force you. And I will see you all for the next video. Bye!